The courtroom doors slammed open. Nobody expected a billionaire to show up with 3 lawyers and a smile like he already owned the verdict. Judge Judy didn't look up from her notes. Not yet. She let the silence stretch until it hurt. If you believe justice still matters, stay till the end. Comment justice. If you're ready for this one, her name was Renata Alvarez, 34 years old. A single mother who ran a small bakery out of a rented storefront on the edge of town. Flour under her nails. Debt in her name. Pride in everything she built with her own 2 hands. She'd opened that bakery 8 years ago with a second-hand oven, a folding table, and a recipe book that belonged to her grandmother. She remembered the first morning she sold out of bread by 9 a.m., how she'd cried in the back room from sheer disbelief that people actually wanted what she made. Every early sunrise since then had felt like a small miracle she refused to take for granted. Regular customers had become something closer to family, stopping by not just for bread, but to ask about her daughter's school grades or to share advice about the neighborhood. Across from her sat Harold Weiss, billionaire, real estate mogul. The kind of man who bought buildings the way other people bought coffee. He wore his confidence like a second suit, tailored and unwavering. To Harold, courtrooms were just another negotiation table. And negotiation tables were places he always walked away from richer than when he sat down. He had grown up believing that people who lost were simply the ones who hadn't tried hard enough. And over the years that belief had hardened into something colder. The conviction that rules existed only for people who couldn't afford to ignore them. His empire had been built on a simple formula: identify what someone needed and take it before they realized it was gone. It had worked for 30 years without a single crack in the foundation. And nothing about this small courtroom, this small case, or this small bakery owner suggested today would be any different. 6 months ago, Harold's company bought the block Renata's bakery sat on. He didn't want her business. He wanted her gone. First came the letters. Vague, bureaucratic, threatening in tone but careful in wording. The kind lawyers write when they want to intimidate without leaving fingerprints. Then the fake violations, one after another, each one costing Renata money she didn't have to contest. She'd hired an accountant for a single afternoon just to understand the paperwork, only to be told that fighting each violation individually would cost more than simply paying the fines. Then, 3 weeks ago, her ovens mysteriously failed inspection, an inspection Harold's people had scheduled without her knowledge. Timed with surgical precision just days before her lease renewal was due, Renata lost her lease. Lost her equipment, lost almost everything she'd spent 8 years building for her daughter's future. She'd sold her car just to cover the last month's utility bills, walking her daughter to school instead, telling her it was good exercise so she wouldn't worry. But she didn't lose her voice. She sued Dot and Harold Weiss. A man who had never lost a legal fight in his life walked into that courtroom certain this would be no different. Ms. Alvarez, Judge J said, finally lifting her eyes. You're claiming the defendant orchestrated the closure of your business through falsified health violations. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, Your Honor, Renata said, her voice shaking but steady underneath. It's what happened. Harold's lead attorney stood immediately, smooth as oil. Your Honor, my client is a respected member of this community who has donated millions to local development. This lawsuit is nothing but a desperate attempt to extract a payout. Judge Judy's expression didn't move. I didn't ask about donations. I asked about violations. A small ripple went through the gallery. Somebody let out a breath they didn't know they were holding. Harold leaned back in his chair, unbothered, almost amused. He'd sat across from judges before. He knew how to make people fold. He'd watched opposing counsel crumble under the mere suggestion of a drawn-out legal war. And he assumed today would follow the same script it always had. Your Honor, he said, speaking for the first time. His voice smooth and unhurried, with respect. "I think we're wasting the court's time. This is a small business dispute, not a criminal matter. Perhaps counsel could remind the court who they're speaking to." The room went still. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. But everyone in that courtroom understood exactly what he meant. Judge Judy set down her pen. She looked at him the way a person looks at a puzzle they've already solved. "Mr. Weiss," she said, calm as still water, "I know exactly who I'm speaking to. The question is whether you know exactly who you're speaking to." Someone in the gallery gasped. Harold's smile faltered, just slightly. "Just enough." Renata's attorney, a young public defender named Tomas Rios, who had taken this case for free, slid a folder across the table. Inside was something Harold didn't know existed. An email, one his own assistant had accidentally sent to the wrong recipient 3 weeks earlier. It had landed, of all places, in the inbox of a paralegal who happened to be Tomas's college roommate. Tomas hadn't shown it to anyone yet. Not the press. Not even Renata. He'd spent 3 sleepless nights deciding exactly when to use it, knowing that in a case like this, timing mattered as much as truth. He was waiting for the right moment. And in that courtroom, under those fluorescent lights, with the billionaire's confidence cracking at the edges, that moment had just arrived. "Your Honor," Thomas said, standing slowly, "before we continue, I'd like to enter new evidence into the record." Harold's attorney turned sharply. "Objection. This wasn't disclosed in discovery." "It exists because your client's team made a mistake," Tomas said, "and I think the court is going to want to see it." Judge Judy's eyes moved from the folder to Tomas, to Harold Weiss, whose jaw had gone tight for the first time all morning. "Approach," she said quietly. The room held its breath, because whatever was in that folder was about to change everything. Tomas handed the folder to the bailiff, who carried it to the bench like it was something fragile. Judge Judy opened it. "Read the first line." Then the second. Her expression didn't change. But something in the room did. "Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments." "This is an internal email," she said, "sent from an account belonging to Weiss Development Group, dated 6 weeks before the health inspection in question." Harold's attorney stood fast, flipping through his own copy of the folder with visibly shaking hands. "Your Honor, we haven't had time to review." "You'll have time," Judge Judy said. "Right now, I'd like Mr. Weiss to explain something to me." She turned the folder slightly, so it faced him. "This email instructs your operations manager to," and I'm quoting directly, "find a reason to shut down the bakery before the lease renewal date, whatever it takes. Care to explain that, Mr. Weiss?" For the first time, Harold Weiss didn't smile. "That email is being taken out of context," he said, his voice tightening at the edges. "My team explores a lot of options when acquiring properties." It doesn't mean what?" Judge Judy asked. "That you meant it? Or that you didn't think anyone would find it?" A murmur rippled through the gallery. Even the court stenographer glanced up from her keyboard, something she rarely did no matter how tense a hearing became. Renata sat frozen, hand pressed to her mouth. 8 years of exhaustion, of believing she was simply unlucky, of blaming herself for every failed inspection and unpaid fee. All of it had a name now. A name sitting 20 feet away in a $3,000 suit. She thought about all the nights she'd stayed awake recalculating her budget, wondering what she'd done wrong, wondering if she simply wasn't cut out for running a business. She had never once considered that someone had been working against her from the very beginning. She remembered calling her daughter's school to explain why she couldn't afford the field trip that month, the shame of it sitting heavier than the debt itself. She had blamed the economy, blamed her own inexperience, blamed anything except the truth, now sitting calmly across the courtroom in an expensive suit. Somewhere in that quiet realization, her grief began turning into something sharper, a resolve she hadn't felt in months. But Harold Weiss hadn't survived 30 years in business by folding under one bad email. He leaned toward his attorney, whispered something, and straightened his tie. A small habitual gesture he always used to reset himself before delivering a counterattack. "Your Honor," he said, "even if that email is real, it proves nothing about the inspection itself. My company didn't perform the inspection. The city did." "That's true," Judge Judy said, "which is an interesting thing for you to bring up, because I have a follow-up question." She looked toward the gallery, toward a man sitting quietly in the third row who had said nothing since the proceedings started. A man in a gray city inspector's jacket, sweating slightly despite the courtroom's air conditioning. "Mr. Dale Pruitt," Judge Judy said, "you performed the inspection on Ms. Alvarez's bakery, correct?" The man froze. Yes, Your Honor." "And is it standard procedure for an inspector to receive a personal payment from the property owner the week before conducting an inspection?" The entire courtroom turned to look at him. Dale Pruitt's face went white. Harold's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is completely irrelevant." "It's entirely relevant," Judge Judy said, without raising her voice, "because if Mr. Pruitt was compensated by the defendant before failing Ms. Alvarez on a fabricated violation, then we're no longer discussing a business dispute. We're discussing fraud." The gallery erupted in whispers. Reporters who had slipped in near the back began scribbling notes furiously. Sensing the story had just outgrown a simple lawsuit, Judge Judy struck her gavel once. Silence returned instantly. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "you're going to want to think very carefully about your next answer, because right now you're the only person in this room who can tell me the truth without losing everything." Dale Pruitt's hands trembled on his knees. He glanced at Harold. Harold's eyes had gone cold, warning, dangerous. Then Pruitt looked back at the judge, and he opened his mouth to speak. "I was paid," Dale Pruitt said quietly. The words landed like a dropped plate. $5,000, he continued, voice cracking. "Wired to my personal account. I was told to find something. Anything. Mold, wiring, gas lines. I picked the ovens because it was the fastest way to shut her down before the lease renewal." Renata made a sound she didn't mean to make. Half gasp, half sob. Thomas reached over without looking, resting a steadying hand on the table in front of her, as if to say the worst part was almost over. Like this video, if you believe the truth always finds a way out. Harold Weiss sat perfectly still, but his knuckles had gone white against the edge of the table. "Mr. Pruitt," Judge Judy said, "who instructed you to falsify that report?" Pruitt's eyes flicked toward Harold one last time. Whatever loyalty he had left evaporated in that glance. "Him," he said, directly. "He said if I didn't do it, he'd make sure I never worked in this city again. He said men like him don't lose, and men like me don't get to complain about how we lose." Harold's attorney stood so fast his chair scraped. "Objection. Hearsay, Your Honor. This witness has no credibility. He has an email confirming a wire transfer," Judge Judy said calmly. "That's not hearsay. That's a paper trail." Harold finally spoke, his voice sharper now, the polish cracking. "This is absurd. I built half the storefronts in this city. I employ thousands of people. And you're going to take the word of a corrupt inspector and a struggling baker over a man who has done more for this community than anyone in this room?" His attorney tried to quiet him, but Harold shrugged the hand off his shoulder. Too far into his own outrage to stop, Judge Judy set her pen down again, slowly, deliberately. "Mr. Weiss," she said, I don't weigh a person's worth by their bank account. I weigh it by their actions. And so far, your actions in this case include bribery, coercion, and the deliberate destruction of a single mother's livelihood. You have no idea what you're talking about, Harold snapped. Standing now, his composure gone entirely. Do you know who I could make disappear from this bench with one phone call? Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff stepped forward. Harold's own attorney grabbed his arm, hissing something urgent under his breath, trying desperately to pull his client back from the edge he had just walked toward in front of everyone. Somewhere near the back, a reporter's pen froze mid-sentence, as if even she couldn't believe what she just heard a man say out loud in open court. Judge Judy didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him the way she might look at a child throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. She had seen powerful men posture before in bigger courtrooms with higher stakes, and every single one of them had eventually discovered the same thing. A title carved into a nameplate meant nothing if the person behind it could be rattled. She had built her entire career on refusing to be rattled, and she wasn't about to start now with a man whose confidence was already crumbling in front of a packed and increasingly restless gallery. Mr. Weiss, she said, you can threaten my career all you like. It won't change one fact sitting on this bench right now. She held up the folder. This is evidence. And evidence doesn't care how many buildings you own. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Even the court reporter, typing every word, seemed to hesitate for a fraction of a second before continuing. Harold's attorney pulled him back down into his seat, whispering urgently. Harold's jaw worked, but for the first time, he said nothing. Renata wiped her eyes, staring at the man who had taken everything from her, and was now, for the first time, afraid. Judge Judy turned back to the folder, flipping to a second document Tomas had just placed in front of her. Her eyebrows lifted, just slightly. Well, she said, it appears there's more. The second document was a spreadsheet. Rows and rows of names. Tomas stood again. Your Honor, that's a list of 6 other small businesses on the same block. All of them received sudden code violations within the last year. All of them closed within weeks of receiving notice. All of them sold their leases to Weiss Development at a fraction of market value. Comment justice below if you think this pattern just changed everything for good. Judge Judy scanned the names slowly. A dry cleaner, a hardware store, a family-run pharmacy, a tailor who'd been on that block for 22 years, a locksmith who had trained his own son into the trade, a flower shop that had supplied every wedding in the neighborhood for a decade. Its owner once featured in the local paper for donating bouquets to the hospital every Sunday. 6 businesses, she said. 6 families. All pushed out the same way. She set the spreadsheet down beside the folder, the 2 documents sitting together now like puzzle pieces finally locked into place. Harold's attorney tried one last time. Your Honor, correlation isn't causation. Businesses close every day for legitimate reasons. They do, Judge Judy agreed. But they don't usually all get inspected by the same city official, who was paid by the same buyer, right before he purchased their leases at a discount. She looked directly at Harold now. This isn't a business dispute anymore, Mr. Weiss. This is a pattern. And patterns don't lie, even when people do. Harold said nothing. The silence coming off him now was different than before. Not calm, not confident. It was the silence of a man watching the walls close in, brick by brick, on an empire he thought was untouchable. For 30 years, he had measured success by how quietly he could win. No headlines, no scandals, just quiet acquisitions and quieter victories. Now the very silence he had relied on to protect him was collapsing into the loudest moment of his life, broadcast in front of reporters, neighbors, and a judge who refused to be intimidated by his name. Every camera flash outside those courtroom doors would now carry his name in a sentence he never wanted written. "Your Honor," Thomas said, "we're requesting the court refer this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal fraud and bribery charges, in addition to the civil damages owed to Ms. Alvarez." Judge Judy nodded slowly. "Noted, but first, let's finish what's in front of us." She turned to Renata, and for the first time since the hearing began, her voice softened, not weak, just human. "Ms. Alvarez, I know the last 6 months have cost you more than money. I can't give you back the time, but I can make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else on that block again." Renata's tears fell freely now, but she was nodding, holding her daughter's photo she'd brought folded in her pocket the whole hearing. She thought of her daughter waiting at home, asking every night if the bakery might reopen and how she'd never known what to say. She thought about the recipe book too, still packed away in a box, waiting for a kitchen that might finally exist again. Judge Judy turned back to Harold Weiss, who would not meet her eyes. "Mr. Weiss," she said, "you walked into my courtroom this morning believing your money made you untouchable. Let me be clear about something before we go any further." She let the pause sit, long, heavy. Money can buy buildings. It can buy silence. It can even buy time. But it cannot buy a verdict in my courtroom. She struck the gavel once. "We'll reconvene in 20 minutes. When we return, I'll be delivering my ruling, and Mr. Weiss, I'd suggest you use that time to prepare for the very real possibility that today is the day everything you built on other people's ruin comes crashing down." The gallery erupted in hushed, urgent whispers as the bailiff called recess. Somewhere near the back, a reporter was already typing a headline into her phone. Harold Weiss sat frozen in his chair, staring at the folder that had just ended his empire, and for the first time in his life, he had absolutely nothing to say. 20 minutes felt like 20 years. When Judge Judy returned to the bench, the courtroom was packed tighter than before. Word had spread through the halls. Reporters had slipped inside. Even the bailiff stood a little straighter, sensing the weight of what was about to happen. Subscribe. If you believe the truth always finds its way to the light. Harold Weiss sat rigid beside his attorneys, his empire hanging on the next few sentences. "I've reviewed the evidence," Judge Judy began. "The email, the financial records, the testimony of Mr. Pruitt, and the pattern involving 6 other businesses on that block." She looked up, and her voice, though calm, carried through every corner of the room. "This court finds the defendant, Harold Weiss, liable for fraud, coercion, and the deliberate calculated destruction of Renata Alvarez's business and livelihood." A wave of quiet gasps swept the gallery, followed by a low murmur that Judge Judy allowed to settle on its own before continuing. "I am awarding Ms. Alvarez full compensatory damages for lost income, lost equipment, and lost opportunity, and, given the deliberate nature of these actions, I am also awarding punitive damages in the amount of $2 million. Renata's hand flew to her mouth. Thomas gripped her shoulder, steadying her, his own eyes glassy with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Furthermore," Judge Judy continued, "I am referring this case, along with the evidence involving the other 6 businesses, to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation into bribery and fraud. Mr. Pruitt's testimony will be part of that referral as well." Dale Pruitt lowered his head, knowing his own reckoning was only beginning. Aware that the badge he'd worn with pride for over a decade would now be remembered for the one decision he could never take back, Judge Judy turned to Harold one final time. "Mr. Weiss, you told this court you could make people disappear with one phone call. Let me tell you what actually disappears today." She paused. "Your leverage. Your leases on that block, obtained through fraud will be reviewed for reversal. Your reputation, built on quiet cruelty, is no longer quiet. And any illusion you had that money outweighs justice, that disappears too. She struck the gavel. Court is adjourned. The room broke into noise, reporters rushing forward. Harold's attorneys already arguing amongst themselves. Harold himself sitting motionless, staring at nothing, as though the verdict hadn't fully reached him yet. Outside the courthouse steps, Renata stood in the sunlight for the first time in months without the weight of debt crushing her shoulders. Tomas stood beside her, quiet and proud. A small crowd of former neighbors, the tailor, the pharmacist, the dry cleaner, the florist, had gathered, having heard the news travel fast through the neighborhood grapevine. "We can get our shops back," the tailor said softly, almost afraid to believe it. "We can get our lives back," the florist added, wiping her eyes. The dry cleaner nodded silently beside her, too overwhelmed to find the words. His hand resting on the shoulder of the pharmacist who had stood by his register every day for 11 years without missing a shift. Renata looked at the folded photo of her daughter in her hand, then up at the sky. She thought about the oven she'd rebuild, the recipes she'd bake again, the mornings she'd finally return to without fear hanging over every batch of bread. She thought, too, about the letter she'd write her grandmother that night, even though she'd been gone for years, just to say that the recipe book was finally coming home, for the first time in a long time. She let herself smile. Because justice hadn't just spoken that day, it had rebuilt something that cruelty had tried to tear down for good. Weeks later, the block looked different. Scaffolding came down instead of going up. Shop signs that had gone dark flickered back on, one by one. Renata reopened her bakery on a quiet Tuesday morning, and the line outside stretched further than it ever had before. Neighbors, strangers, people who had simply heard the story and wanted to be part of the ending. She stood behind the counter, flour on her hands again. And for the first time in a year, the exhaustion she felt was the good kind. Share the story with someone who still believes that truth always wins. If you made it all the way to the end, comment justice served. Money can silence a room for a while. It can never silence the truth forever.